Chapter 3: Healthy and Normal versus Pathological Avoidance. Healthy avoidance. Avoidance can be healthy when it is, as Sullivan suggests, a conjunctive force used to enhance security. Healthy avoidance can also consist of a rational, philosophical desire to be alone. As such, it is preferential, that is, something individuals have reasonably decided is both good and good for them, and so have comfortably built into their lives. A splendid, self-sufficient self-containment that allows them to achieve their desire to remain independent of others, be their own masters, and enjoy the peace that comes with removal and detachment. For such avoidance, the song that refers to jangling spurs that say that you should roll merrily along, being glad that you are single, is apropos. For these are independent souls who aver that relationships, and particularly marriage, are not right for them, because they want to come and go as they please, because for them, being me does actually require being free. Some case examples. One such avoidant would regularly and comfortably eat dinner in a restaurant all by herself, reading the Sunday newspaper on Saturday night, and go walking alone by the seashore day in and day out. Most of all, she liked closing her eyes and putting hot compresses over them, having a few drinks at home alone, rocking by herself on her porch in her favorite rocking chair, self-hypnotizing by submitting to the drowsy nirvana and sleep-inducing drone of the lulling train or car ride, being soothed by monotonous ruggers, and performing repetitive activities like crocheting or knitting. She also relished reading escape literature that took her away to the cold north or out west to the lone prairie, where she fantasized riding a horse by herself under the stars. If she suffered at all, it was not from her isolation, but from the social pressures that made her feel guilty about being as isolated as she really wanted to be. She wanted to eat, live, and play alone, but a critical world and an uncomprehending therapist made her ashamed of feeling that way, although that was what she wanted and exactly what seemed right for her as an individual. A married writer felt, "I would like to retreat from the world, line my room with cork like Proust, and write, write alone all day long." Then he did essentially just that. He purchased a house trailer, which he parked in the driveway of his home, and worked there, to avoid having my family disturb my concentration. Eventually, he worked from California to New York, leaving his wife and children behind, commuting but only on occasional weekends. He acted not out of a pathological fear of closeness, but out of a desire for separateness, in the belief, later proved correct, that distance would lend enchantment both to his work and to his relationship with his wife, who, fortunately, being an avoidant herself, was even more comfortable than he was with the arrangement. A middle-aged patient had a job working as a blackjack dealer in Las Vegas gaming halls. One day, she had an epiphany. Tired of stealing money from drunks, she instead decided to buy and go live by herself on 5 acres of land in northern Arizona. Her land was a piece of desert without water or electricity, 2 miles from her nearest neighbor, a place whose extreme remoteness she called the main advantage of living in the wild. With her own hands, she built a log cabin out of limbs she cut from the trees in her backyard. She now hauls her water from 30 miles away in her Chevy truck, uses solar panels to make electricity, and heats her home with other logs cut from the trees around her house. She never gets bored because she has to work too hard for that. And she loves her existence because daily she reminds herself that life is all about not what she has, but what she has left over to give to others. Avoidance is also healthy when it is a limited, small-scale, creative, distancing maneuver appropriate to specific circumstances or for the ultimately greater non-avoidant good of providing a welcome escape from a tumultuous world too much with one. A world full of uncomfortable, unimportant, but upsetting relationships likely to spread, to contaminate, undermine, or destroy what potentially more meaningful social and personal contexts remain. Such avoidance, as a useful method for dealing with stressful external situations, is a justifiable, self-protective, reactive response that wards off properly anticipated or actual humiliation or rejection at the hands of the inconsiderate or hurtful others that come into everyone's life, such as the intrusive, backbiting professional colleague or the undesirable, overly aggressive personal suitor. Potential lovers should at least consider avoiding partners who do not reciprocate and offer love back. And we all should at least consider avoiding people who torture us by nagging us, hurt us by being prejudiced against us, or threaten to harm us. If not physically, then emotionally, by reviving old, unmanageable, traumatic interpersonal agony, or by suddenly rejecting or dumping us. Nor is there any sense in being a hero with wild, potentially dangerous paranoids, having a fight that wins points but costs lives. In short, there are many self-help books out there on how to get along with difficult people. What many avoidants need is a self-help book on how to get along out there without them. Avoidance is also healthy when it is a defense that provides a welcome resolution of or escape from reactive inner turmoil. It is healthy to want to escape from one's own sadistic impulses by avoiding wild kingdom animal shows that rub one's nose in the laws of the jungle, and even to want to avoid facing sexual desires that provoke guilt, staying away from X-rated movies, less for the moral reasons generally cited, and more because the close-up anatomical view revives unintegrated or unmanageable primal sin experiences, or activates quiescent prior traumatic sexual molestations. A particularly bright side of the defense of obsessive compulsive avoidant procrastination is pause, thus allowing time to think. That permits internal conflicts and difficult real life situations to be resolved implicitly. And in the longer run, by simply waiting for the tincture of time to kick in. Normal avoidance. Avoidance that is not entirely healthy can still, under certain circumstances, be within normal limits. For example, avoidance is within normal limits when, as part of grief, it permits the individual to be alone with his or her nostalgia, with his or her faded clippings and reminiscences, dwelling on a pleasurable past to deny an intolerable present, indulging in a better days, if only fantasy. One patient, after the death of his wife, retreated into arranging and rearranging his old photos and the sympathy cards he got when his wife died, doing so in order to keep alive her memory to avoid suffering the pain associated with having to live his life without her. He also stayed alone in the large house they once occupied together, just so that he could continue to be surrounded by the pleasant memories there, even though the house was too large for his needs, too difficult for him to keep up, and in the suburbs, although all his activities were in the city. And at a shore house they once shared, he kept and nurtured all his wife's plantings, even though, or in a sense, just because the yard, although it was becoming overgrown and wild, still remained in its original state. However, a continuum exists between normal and pathological grief, with pathological grief becoming avoidance when it is excessive, overly intense, continuous, and prolonged, as in the following case. A case example. A patient informed me, "One of my friends made his first million right out of college writing some kind of innovative software, so he retired and followed his dream to sing folk songs with his guitar. He got a gig at a famous restaurant and bar. Later on, he married, then divorced, but apparently he still loved his ex-wife. Then she died a few years after the divorce. Now he had to stop singing because he would unpredictably start crying at the thought of her death. When he wrote to me to express his condolences about my own wife's death, he told me all of this, and how he now lives out in the woods somewhere, like a hermit, telecommutes for an advertising company, and has for his only friends the business cable channel, which he lives on all day. He never leaves his home, and never will, according to him, and the tears still come, unexpectedly. Avoidance can also be within normal limits when it is part of the normal developmental process. For example, part of adolescent turmoil, where adolescent rebellion has the beneficial purpose of paving the way for the child to grow up and become an adult, who, having turned into a more independent man or woman, can now leave home without second thoughts and free of guilty regrets. Avoidance is also normal when it is a rational reflexive response to a difficult partner. Is this the case here? And who in the following exchange is avoiding whom? A case example. I recently got the following letter. Can you please direct me, my husband, to someone in or near Fargo, ND, who might be able to help him? He has avoidant personality disorder and has ended our relationship countless times. I'm not only heartbroken each time, but am at my wit's end. And his doctor has recently referred him to a social worker who specializes in women's addictions of all things. I just don't know where to turn, as I love this man dearly, and I don't know how to get him the help he needs. And I don't know how I can cope with this, short of ending the relationship, which I really don't want to do. I replied that I wished I could help, but I didn't know of anyone in her area. She shot back in what I thought might be a somewhat passive-aggressive fashion, as follows. Dear Dr. Kanter, thank you for answering my email. I am not very hopeful for my husband finding the help that he needs in this town. Was she expressing anger toward me for being less than helpful in the form of disappointment? At any rate, I felt bad and wished I were somewhere else. Was I being highly attuned to her unspoken anger, or was I just being hypersensitive out of my sense of guilt? Avoidance is also normal when it is an interim, transitional, planned part of psychotherapy. In fact, therapy well done works partly by temporarily enhancing avoidance, by offering the avoidant not only a sanctuary from everyday cares, but also a time out where he or she can temporarily stop, take stock, retreat, and reconsider life options and goals. Becoming more avoidant for now in preparation for becoming less avoidant in the future. Avoidant personality disorder. The following section attempts to clear up what appears to be widespread confusion about the differences between avoidant personality traits and the full avoidant personality disorder, AvPD syndrome, as well as about comorbidity, where AvPD coexists with one or more diagnosable axis 2 disorders, resulting in a mixed personality disorder. Comorbidity is discussed at length in Chapter 7. Personality traits. In this book, although I do not always spell it out, many of my discussions of AvPD are in fact discussions of avoidance. That is, they are not about AvPD, but about the individual traits that together go into making up the AvPD. These traits by themselves do not constitute the personality disorder, which consists of a cluster of personality traits. Personality traits are primary behaviors, the product of rigid, armored attitudes that are in turn set ways of viewing things, coming from within, weakly and only with effort influenced from without. Overly rigid, fixed, repetitive, predictable, and often inappropriate responses, barely subject to the dictates of reality and common sense. Traits resemble overvalued ideas, preoccupying beliefs, close to convictions that lie somewhere on the continuum between rational beliefs and irrational delusions. An example of an overvalued idea is emotionally based, rigid, inflexible, unvarying, and off-the-mark ideology from the politically far left or far right. Some traits, like excessive worry, are ego-dystonic. That is, they feel like unwanted foreign bodies in the mind, while others, like withdrawal, can be ego-syntonic. That is, they feel acceptable, desirable, and enjoyable. Dynamically, traits originate in developmental fixation or regression, are products of learning and experience, can be the result of identification with others with similar or the same traits, constitute the behavioral manifestations of active defenses, can be the product of an unpredictable, sometimes overly lax and sometimes overly harsh, superego or conscious structure, and can represent the lingering legacy of early unintegrated trauma. Generally speaking, traits may be either adaptive, as the trait of ambitious competitiveness can be, or maladaptive, as are the traits of ality traits are not inherently either normal or pathological. This is so because legitimate individual personality differences exist, with some people normally more introverted than others, and such different personalities are uncomplicated type A and type B personalities, both within the normal range. Also, in determining the presence of normalcy versus psychopathology, external circumstances have to be taken into account. Thus, a trait that is pathological under some cultural and environmental circumstances is non-pathological under others. For example, on vacation or at a special time of the year, with such terms as winter doldrums reminding us that we as individuals and society as a whole often make cultural allowances for some deviation from year-round norms. Personality disorder. In exceptional cases, A personality disorder can consist of the use of one favored trait employed either only under certain circumstances or continuously. The former is exemplified by dissociation that only occurs in the face of acceptance emergencies, or projection that only occurs under extreme stress and is meant to create a resolutely not me excuse to avoid feeling guilty about one's unacceptable thoughts and actions. Generally, however, a personality disorder is made up of multiple traits. These tend to be selected on the basis of affinity with each other. For example, shyness and submission, or withholding and withdrawing. Also, unless the traits selected are inherently distinctive, and if multiple, combined in a unique way, personality style, not personality disorder, will result. In the realm of inherently distinctive, the traits that constitute a personality disorder are generally abrasive and pungent, with negative traits favored over positive traits, so that Mr. Lowdown predominates over Mr. Lovable, and maladaptive traits are favored over adaptive traits. In the realm of combined in a unique way, unless there is a critical mass of traits that additionally synergistically distort the personality, we will not have a personality disorder, but a pattern less dramatic in presentation, startling in nature, and devastating in effect than a true syndrome needs to be. Put another way, unless the resulting psychological construct makes waves, ruffles feathers, one's own or others, and attracts psychiatric attention because the individual, for any one of a number of reasons, develops difficulties that are sufficiently overt to be obvious and sufficiently intense to become noticeable. That is, unless there are discrete, obvious, and generally troublesome interpersonal or social behavioral consequences, the diagnosis of a personality style or type rather than a personality disorder should be considered. In the realm of comorbidity, many, if not most, avoidants do not exhibit avoidant personality traits or disorder alone. AvPD is commonly not diagnosed by itself. Rather, AvPD is often part of a complex syndrome characterized by more than one personality disorder, the elusive pure singular syndrome, rarely ruling in a given individual. In great measure, this is because the individual component traits of AvPD are not distinctive enough to suggest only one diagnosis, so that, for example, the trait of withdrawal can also be schizoid or phobic, leading the diagnostician to call the withdrawn individual a mixed avoidant or schizoid, or to say that he or she is suffering from a personality disorder, best described as avoidance due to a social phobia generalizing. Like many personality disorders, AvPD is a somewhat elusive entity due to being made up of traits that are in themselves undistinguished and assembled into a tentative and shifting psychological edifice, rough in outline and construction, that is less a firm, unvarying entity than a proclivity to move in a certain direction. In this case, anxious withdrawal as distinct, for example, from suspicious remoteness. Conversely, only a few personality disorders have a relatively hard-edged identity. The obsessive-compulsive and the paranoid representing two exceptions. A caveat is that a personality disordered label cannot be attached to an individual unless an experienced clinician has seen the patient in person, carefully studied him or her over a significant period of time, and determined if overall behavior, not just one or two examples of it, taken out of or even in context warrants that such a determination be made.